What if the moment you decide to give up on love is exactly when it finds you again in the most unexpected way? In this story, I take you inside my quiet life in Ohio, where loneliness, a single dad with a broken family, and a few simple moments slowly changed everything. This isn't just about love. It's about healing, second chances, and the truth no one tells you when you feel like quitting. Stay with me. It might change how you see your own story. Almost gave up on love. Have you ever reached a point where you quietly tell yourself, maybe love is not for me anymore, not because you don't believe in it, but because you're simply too tired to try again? This video is for that exact moment, the one where your heart is still beating, but it's beating more out of habit than hope. Because what if I told you, the moment I almost gave up on love completely was exactly when I met a single dad in Ohio, a man with tired eyes, a broken family, and a story that somehow mirrored my own in ways I wasn't ready to face? It didn't start like a love story. It started like most quiet endings do, slowly, invisibly, without drama. I was living in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where the wind feels louder than people, and evenings come too early in the winter. You would think moving to the United States would feel exciting, full of opportunity, like something out of a movie. But real life doesn't come with background music. It comes with silence, long, heavy silence. And in that silence, everything you've been avoiding starts to speak. I remember one night, sitting by the window, watching snow fall for the first time in my life. It looked beautiful, almost unreal. But instead of feeling amazed, I felt empty. Because beauty doesn't always fix what's broken inside you. Sometimes it just makes you realize how alone you are when you have no one to share it with. You see, before Ohio, I had already been through something that quietly changed the way I looked at love. Nothing dramatic. No big betrayal scene like in movies. Just small disappointments, repeated over time. Conversations that slowly turned into silence. Promises that quietly disappeared. And one day, without even noticing when it happened, I stopped expecting anything from anyone. Maybe you've been there too. That place where you don't hate love, you just don't trust it anymore. So, I made a quiet decision. Not out loud. Not to anyone else. Just to myself. I'm done trying. Not done living. Not done working. Just done hoping that someone would come and change something in my life. And strangely, that decision made things feel easier. When you expect nothing, you can't be disappointed. When you don't open your heart, nothing can hurt you. It's a very logical system, except for one problem. You also stop feeling the good things. Life becomes safe, but flat. Peaceful, but empty. And that's exactly where I was when I met him. It happened on a completely ordinary day. No music. No slow motion.
No magical coincidence.
Just a small coffee shop in Ohio, the kind where people don't talk too much, and everyone seems to be carrying their own quiet story. I almost didn't go in that day. I remember standing outside for a few seconds, debating whether to just go back home. It was cold, and honestly, I didn't feel like being around people. But for some reason, maybe just habit, maybe something else, I opened the door. And that small decision changed everything. He was sitting in the corner. Not in a way that draws attention. Actually, the opposite. The kind of person you might not notice at first, unless you're also someone who understands what quiet looks like. He had a laptop open, a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold, and a face that looked tired. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. There's a difference. And if you've ever carried something heavy in your life, You recognize it immediately in others.
I didn't talk to him that day.
In fact, nothing happened at all. I ordered my drink, sat down, and pretended to be busy. But somehow, I was aware of him the entire time. Not in a romantic way. Not even in a curious way. Just aware. Like two people sitting in the same room, both pretending they're fine. Over the next few days, I saw him again. Same place. Same corner. Same quiet energy. And slowly, without planning it, that coffee shop became part of my routine. Still, we didn't speak. And maybe that's why it felt safe. Because sometimes, the most comfortable connections are the ones that don't ask anything from you.
No expectations.
No pressure. Just presence. But life doesn't stay quiet forever. One afternoon, something small happened. The kind of moment most people would forget immediately. But for me, it became the beginning of everything I didn't know I needed. I dropped my cup. Coffee spilled across the table, onto the floor, onto everything. It wasn't a big accident, but it was enough to break the silence I had been hiding in. And before I could even react, he stood up.
No hesitation. No awkwardness.
Just a simple human response. Are you okay? That was it. A simple question. But something about the way he said it, it didn't feel like politeness. It felt real. Like he actually wanted to know the answer. And for a second, just a second, I didn't know how to respond. Because when you've been alone for too long, even kindness can feel unfamiliar. I'm fine, I said. Of course I did. That's what we always say, right? But he didn't immediately go back to his seat. He helped clean up the mess, quietly, without making it a big deal.
No unnecessary conversation.
No trying to impress.
Just there.
And then, as simply as it started, the moment ended. He went back to his corner. I sat down again. The coffee shop returned to silence. But something had changed. Not outside. Inside. Because for the first time in a long time, I felt something I wasn't expecting. Not love. Not attraction. Just a small crack in the wall I had built around myself. And that's the dangerous thing about moments like that. They don't look important. They don't feel life-changing. But they open doors you didn't plan to open. That night, I went home and tried to ignore it. Told myself it meant nothing. Just a random interaction. Just a polite stranger. But my mind kept replaying that simple question. Are you okay? And for the first time in a long time, I caught myself thinking something I hadn't allowed in months. What if I'm not? What if I've just been pretending this whole time? What if being fine is just another way of saying, I've given up? I didn't have answers yet. I didn't know his story. I didn't know that he was a single dad. I didn't know about the broken family, the long nights, the quiet struggles he carried. All I knew was this. The moment I decided I was done with love, something or someone quietly stepped into my life and refused to stay invisible. And that was the beginning of a story I didn't plan. A story that would challenge everything I believed about love, about healing, and about whether a broken family can ever feel whole again. Sometimes, the most life-changing chapters don't begin with passion. They begin with a simple question you weren't ready to answer. Are you okay? A stranger in Ohio. There's a strange kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being somewhere you don't belong yet. Ohio taught me that. Not in a dramatic way. Not with some big life event. But slowly, quietly, in the way everyday moments started to feel heavier than they should. You wake up, you go outside, you see people living their lives, and somehow you feel like you're watching everything through glass. Close enough to see, but not close enough to touch. That was my life in Ohio at the beginning. You might think moving to the United States feels like stepping into a dream. Big roads, open skies, clean neighborhoods, everything organized, everything calm. And yes, on the surface, it was exactly that. The streets were wide, the houses looked like something out of a catalog, and the air, especially in the early mornings, felt almost too quiet. But here's the thing no one tells you. When everything outside is calm, the noise inside your head gets louder. I remember my first week there. I went to a grocery store, thinking it would be simple. Just buy a few things, go home, normal life. But the moment I stepped inside, something shifted. People moved quickly. They spoke casually, naturally, effortlessly. Conversations flowed around me like water, and I stood there, trying to catch even a few words. Paper or plastic? It was such a simple question. You've probably heard it 100 times. But in that moment, my brain froze. I knew the words. Of course I did. I had studied English before. I understood grammar, vocabulary, even some listening practice. But real-life English? It's different. It doesn't wait for you. It doesn't slow down. It doesn't care if you need a second to think. So I stood there, smiling awkwardly, pretending I understood, while my mind scrambled to keep up. Paper, plastic. I repeated in my head, like it was a difficult math problem. The cashier looked at me, not impatient, just waiting.
I'm sorry,
I said. And that moment, that tiny, almost invisible moment, stayed with me longer than I expected. Because it wasn't about the question. It was about the feeling. The feeling of not being able to respond fast enough. The feeling of being slightly out of sync with the world around you. Like everyone else got a script and you didn't. That feeling followed me everywhere. At the coffee shop. On the street. Even when someone just said, "How's it going?" You'd think that's an easy question, right? But here's the truth. In America, how's it going? Isn't always a real question. It's a rhythm. A social habit. And if you answer it too honestly or too slowly, the moment becomes awkward. So I learned to say, "Good, how about you?" automatically. Even when I didn't feel good. Even when I felt completely lost. And that's how it starts. You don't just feel like a stranger in a place. You start feeling like a stranger in conversations. In interactions, even in your own thoughts. Because everything takes effort. Every sentence you hear, you have to process. Every sentence you say, you have to build carefully. And while you're doing that, the world keeps moving. Fast, natural, effortless. It's exhausting. Not physically, mentally, emotionally. And when you're already carrying something heavy inside, like I was, that extra weight becomes almost too much. I started going out less. Not because I didn't want to explore, but because every interaction felt like a test I wasn't ready for. And failing quietly, over and over again, does something to you. It makes you withdraw. It makes you smaller. It makes you choose silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it feels too hard. And that's where the real loneliness begins. Not in being alone, but in choosing to disappear a little every day. I remember walking through a park one afternoon. It was beautiful, The kind of peaceful scene people take photos of. Children playing, couples talking, dogs running freely. Everything looked normal. And I was there. But I wasn't really part of it. I sat on a bench, watching people laugh, talk, connect, and I realized something uncomfortable. Connection looks easy when you're not the one trying. From the outside, it's effortless. From the inside, it can feel impossible. That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from this place. I told myself, just get through the days. Don't expect more. No deep friendships.
No meaningful conversations.
And definitely no love. Because love requires connection. And connection felt like something just out of reach. But life has a strange sense of timing. Just when you lower your expectations to zero, something small happens. Not enough to change everything. Just enough to make you pause. For me, that something wasn't a big event. It wasn't a life-changing opportunity. It was simply seeing the same person again. That coffee shop. That corner. That man. At first, it didn't mean anything. Just a familiar face in an unfamiliar place. But familiarity is powerful when everything else feels foreign. You start noticing small details. The way he always sat in the same spot. The way he checked his phone, then looked away like he didn't really want to read what was on it. The way he seemed present but also somewhere else at the same time. And without realizing it, I started to feel less alone. Not because we talked. We didn't. But because someone else in that room carried the same quiet energy I was trying to hide. Two strangers. Sitting in silence. Both pretending they were okay. And maybe that's how some stories begin. Not with excitement. Not with sparks. But with recognition. The kind that doesn't need words. The kind that slowly, quietly makes you wonder, maybe I'm not the only one feeling this way. At that point, I still didn't know anything about him. Not his name. Not his life. Not the fact that he was raising children on his own. Not the pain he had already lived through. All I knew was this. In a place where I felt invisible, someone else seemed to understand what that invisibility felt like. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Not a conversation. Not a connection. Just a presence that makes the silence feel shared. But here's the thing about shared silence. It doesn't stay silent forever. Sooner or later, something breaks it. And when it does, everything changes. I just didn't know yet how much it would change me. Or how deeply one simple connection could pull me into a story far more complicated than I was ready for. Because the man in that corner wasn't just another stranger. He was a single dad, with a past I couldn't see yet, a family I didn't know about, and a life that would soon become part of mine. The man with tired eyes. Some people don't walk into your life loudly. They don't try to impress you. They don't stand out in a crowd. They don't say anything that feels extraordinary. And yet somehow, they stay in your mind longer than anyone else. That was him. The man in the corner of the coffee shop. If you saw him for the first time, you probably wouldn't think much. He dressed simply. Nothing flashy. No strong presence that demanded attention. But if you looked just a little longer, not at his clothes, not at what he was doing, but at his face, you would notice something different. His eyes. They weren't sad in an obvious way. They were tired. Not the kind of tired you fix with sleep. The kind that comes from carrying too much for too long, without anyone really noticing. And the strange thing is, when you felt that kind of tired before, you recognize it immediately in someone else. That's probably why I kept noticing him. Not because I was curious. Not because I was interested. But because something about him felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. We still didn't talk. Days passed like that. Same coffee shop. Same routine. Same quiet distance between two people who had no reason to cross paths, and yet kept ending up in the same place. It almost felt like life was waiting for something small to happen. And then one afternoon it did. I came in later than usual that day. The place was a little more crowded, and for the first time his usual seat was taken. I didn't think much of it at first. I ordered my drink, turned around, and realized there was only one empty seat left. Across from him. For a second, I hesitated. You know that moment, right? When something completely normal suddenly feels like a big decision. Sit somewhere else and stay invisible, or sit down and risk a conversation you're not ready for. I almost chose the first option. But something stopped me. Maybe curiosity. Maybe loneliness. Or maybe just the quiet feeling that avoiding everything hadn't really made life better. So I walked over and sat down.
No dramatic moment.
No music. Just a small decision that felt bigger than it should have. For a few seconds, we both pretended nothing was happening. He looked at his laptop. I looked at my phone. Two strangers sitting across from each other, carefully avoiding eye contact. And then it happened. Hey. One word. Simple. Unexpected. I looked up. He wasn't smiling too much. Not trying to be friendly in an overwhelming way. Just acknowledging that I was there.
Y replía.
And just like that, the silence broke. Not completely, but enough. You usually sit over there, right? He said, nodding slightly toward the corner. I was surprised. Not because of the question, but because he had noticed. Yeah, I said. And you usually sit here. He gave a small, almost invisible smile. Guess we both lost our spots today. It wasn't a special conversation. If you wrote it down, it would look almost boring. But here's what matters. It felt real. No pressure.
No expectations.
No need to impress.
Just two people talking.
We paused again after that. Not awkwardly. Just naturally. Like both of us were still figuring out how much space this moment could take. Then he closed his laptop. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just enough to show he was present. I'm Mark, he said. I told him my name. And for the first time since arriving in Ohio, I didn't feel like I was performing a conversation. I wasn't trying to get every word perfect. I wasn't overthinking every sentence. I was just there, talking. Of course, it wasn't smooth. There were pauses. Moments where I had to think about what to say. Times where I searched for the right words and didn't quite find them. But something interesting happened. He waited. Not in a polite, impatient way, but in a way that made it clear it was okay to take my time. And that changed everything. Because most of the time, the hardest part about speaking isn't the language. It's the fear of not being fast enough. Of not being good enough. Of making things uncomfortable. But when someone removes that pressure, you start to breathe differently. You start to speak differently. More honestly. More slowly. More like yourself. We talked about simple things. The weather. How long I had been in Ohio. What I thought of the city. Nothing deep. Nothing personal. And yet it felt like one of the most meaningful conversations I had in a long time, because it wasn't about the topic. It was about the feeling. The feeling of being heard, even when your words aren't perfect. The feeling of being seen, even when you're not trying to stand out. And then, just as the conversation started to feel comfortable, something shifted. Not in a big way.
Just a small detail.
But enough to change how I saw him. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and for a split second, his expression changed. That tired look in his eyes, it came back.
Stronger this time.
Not something you would notice if you weren't paying attention. But I was. Because I knew that look. He picked up the phone, typed a quick message, then put it face down on the table. "Sorry," he said. "I might have to leave soon." "It's okay," I replied. I didn't ask anything. It didn't feel like my place. But something inside me became curious. Not in a dramatic, emotional way. Just quietly curious. Because that moment revealed something important. There was more to his life than what I was seeing. More than this calm, quiet version of him sitting across from me. And I wasn't wrong. I just didn't know how much more. We talked a little longer. Then he stood up. "It was nice talking to you," he said. "You too." And just like that, it ended. No exchange of numbers. No big plans. No promise of meeting again. Just a simple interaction. But as he walked away, I realized something strange. For the first time since arriving in Ohio, I didn't feel invisible. And that feeling stayed with me long after I left the coffee shop. Because sometimes, it's not the length of a conversation that matters. It's what it awakens in you. And that day, something woke up in me that I thought I had already buried. Not love, not hope, just openness. A small willingness to see what might happen next. But what I didn't realize yet was this. That man with tired eyes wasn't just someone passing through my story. He was someone carrying a story of his own. A story that involved a broken family, children, and a past that would soon become impossible for me to ignore. Because the next time I saw him, he wouldn't be alone. His broken family story. You can learn a lot about someone not from what they say, but from what quietly follows them into a room. The next time I saw Mark, he wasn't alone. And somehow, that changed everything before a single word was spoken. It was a late afternoon, colder than usual, the kind of cold that makes people walk faster and talk less. I pushed open the door of the coffee shop, already expecting the same quiet routine, same corner, same silence, same distance. But this time, the corner felt different, because there were two small figures sitting with him. Children.
For a second I paused.
Not dramatically. Just enough to notice that something about him didn't match the version I had created in my mind. The quiet man with tired eyes, always alone, always still, now sitting across from two kids who were very much alive, very much present. And suddenly, the story I thought I understood didn't make sense anymore. I almost turned around, not because I didn't want to see him, but because something about this new detail made things feel more complicated. You know that feeling, right? When something simple starts becoming real, and real feels harder to deal with. But before I could decide, one of the kids looked up. And kids don't hesitate. They don't overthink. They don't pretend not to notice. "Hi," the little girl said, smiling like we already knew each other. And just like that, I was part of the moment. I smiled back. Mark turned, slightly surprised, then relaxed when he saw me.
Hey, he said.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Such a simple sentence. But somehow, it felt warmer this time. Less like two strangers. More like something beginning. These are my kids, he added gently. And there it was. Not hidden. Not complicated. Just said simply, like it was a normal part of his life. Because for him it was. But for me it changed everything. We started talking again, but this time, the rhythm was different. The conversation wasn't just between two adults trying to be careful. It was alive, unpredictable, occasionally interrupted by questions, laughter, small distractions. And strangely, it felt easier. The pressure I usually felt when talking disappeared. Because with kids, perfection doesn't matter. Clarity does. Simplicity does. Presence does. What's your name? The boy asked me directly. I told him. He repeated it, slightly mispronouncing it, then laughed at himself. And instead of feeling embarrassed, I laughed too, because for the first time, communication didn't feel like a test. It felt like connection. We talked about simple things again. Favorite foods.
School.
The weather. Nothing deep. And yet, everything felt more real than any perfect conversation I had tried to have before. But in between those small, light moments, I started noticing the details. The way Mark watched his kids carefully, even while talking. The way he gently corrected them, not with strictness, but with patience. The way his attention was always divided, not because he wanted it to be, but because it had to be. And then I noticed something else. There was no one else. No mention of a mother. No casual reference. No sign of another adult in their lives. At first, I told myself not to assume anything. But sometimes, absence speaks louder than presence. And slowly, quietly, a question formed in my mind. Not out of curiosity, out of understanding. Because I had seen that kind of absence before. Not in him, but in life.
We didn't talk about it that day.
He didn't explain anything. And I didn't ask. Because some stories you don't rush into. You wait. You listen. You let them reveal themselves when they're ready. But the feeling stayed with me. That there was more behind his tired eyes than I had realized. A weight, a history, something that didn't disappear just because he smiled at his kids. And then something small happened again. One of those moments that most people would overlook. But if you're paying attention, it tells you everything. The little girl dropped her cup. Juice spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor.
She froze.
Not because of the mess, but because of fear. That quick, silent fear children have when they think they've done something wrong. He simply stood up, grabbed some napkins, and knelt down beside her. Hey, he said softly. It's okay. Accidents happen. That was it.
No anger. No blame.
Just calm. And something about that moment hit me harder than I expected. Because you don't respond like that unless you've learned patience the hard way. Unless you've been through something that taught you what really matters. Unless you've already seen what real problems look like and know that a spilled drink isn't one of them. And suddenly, his tired eyes made more sense. This wasn't just a man who worked too much. This was a man who carried responsibility every single day. Alone. We sat back down. The kids continued talking like nothing happened. The moment passed. But for me, something shifted again. Because now I wasn't just seeing him. I was seeing his life. And his life wasn't simple. As the afternoon went on, the conversation slowed. The kids got restless. He checked the time more often. And eventually he stood up. "We should go," he said gently. They gathered their things, putting on jackets, moving with that familiar chaos that only families have. And for a second, I felt like I was watching something I wasn't part of. Something complete. Something real. But before he left, he turned back to me.
"Hey," he said.
"It was nice having you here with us. Not talking to you. Not seeing you. But having you here." And that small difference stayed with me. Because it meant something more. It meant presence. It meant inclusion. It meant that, even for a short moment, I wasn't just an outsider anymore. I was part of something, even if it was temporary, even if it was undefined. As they walked out, the door closed behind them and the coffee shop returned to its usual quiet. But it didn't feel the same anymore, because now I knew something I didn't know before. The man with tired eyes wasn't just carrying his own story. He was carrying a family. A broken one, maybe. A complicated one, definitely. And somehow, I had just stepped into the edge of it, without realizing how deep it would go, or how much it would change me. Because the truth was this. Meeting him wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the beginning of understanding what love really costs, and what it takes to rebuild something that's already been broken. Slow conversations, soft feelings. There's something no one tells you about connection. It doesn't always arrive like a spark. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as small, ordinary conversations that don't seem important at first, until one day, you realize those moments have slowly changed how you feel about someone. That's what started happening with Mark. After that afternoon with his kids, something shifted between us. Not dramatically. There was no sudden closeness, no deep confessions, no moment where everything became clear. Instead, it was subtle. We just kept seeing each other. Same coffee shop. Same time of day. But now, instead of sitting in silence across the room, we sat closer. Sometimes at the same table. Sometimes just near enough to exchange a few words. And those words, they were simple. Almost too simple to matter. But somehow they mattered more than anything else. "How was your day?" "Busy." "Same." A short conversation. Nothing impressive. But it carried something deeper. Because behind those simple answers, there was understanding. You could hear it in the pauses. You could feel it in the tone. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to make conversations perfect. I was just letting them happen. At first, I thought it was just convenience. Two people with similar routines, ending up in the same place, filling the silence with casual talk. But then I started noticing something strange. I began to look forward to those moments. Not in an obvious way. Not like excitement. More like quiet anticipation. The kind where you don't admit it to yourself, but you walk a little faster to get there. You arrive a little earlier. You glance at the door, without realizing why. And if he wasn't there, something felt off. Not empty. Just incomplete. That's how it begins. Not with love. With presence. With familiarity. With the comfort of knowing someone else exists in your day. We never had long, deep conversations at first. In fact, most of our talks were made of broken sentences, pauses, small laughs when something didn't come out right. Sometimes I searched for words. Sometimes I said things in the wrong way. And every time, I expected that moment, the one where the other person gets uncomfortable, where the conversation slows, where you feel like you've made a mistake. But it never came. Mark didn't rush me.
He didn't correct me.
He didn't make the moment feel awkward. He just stayed. And that changed something fundamental. Because when you feel safe in a conversation, you don't just speak better. You feel better. You stop focusing on what might go wrong and start paying attention to what's actually happening. And what was happening between us was simple, but real. One afternoon, we were talking about something completely ordinary, food, I think, when his daughter interrupted. "Dad, can we get pizza tonight?" He smiled slightly. "Maybe. We'll see." She looked at me. "Do you like pizza?" Such an easy question. And yet for a second I froze. Not because I didn't understand,
but because I realized something.
This wasn't just a conversation anymore. I wasn't just talking to him. I was part of his world, even if only a little. "Yes," I said, smiling. "I like pizza." She nodded seriously, like that answer mattered more than anything else. "Good. Then you can come with us." The table went quiet for a second. Not uncomfortable, just unexpected. Mark looked at her, then at me, slightly amused, slightly unsure. "Hey," he said gently to her. "We don't invite people like that." "But why?" she asked. And there it was. The kind of honest question adults avoid but kids ask without hesitation. Why not? Why can't someone new be part of something simple? Why does everything have to be complicated? Mark didn't answer immediately, and I could feel something shift in the air. Not tension, not awkwardness, just awareness. That this moment, as small as it seemed, was crossing a line neither of us had talked about. I smiled, trying to ease it. "Maybe another time," I said. She accepted it easily, already distracted by something else. But the moment stayed, not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. That somehow, without planning it, without defining it, I had stepped a little closer into his life. And that scared me more than I expected, because closeness means risk. It means expectations. It means the possibility of losing something again. That night, I thought about it more than I wanted to admit. Not about the invitation, not about pizza, but about the feeling behind it. The feeling of being included, of being seen not as a stranger, not as someone passing by, but as someone who could belong. And that word belong is dangerous when you've already decided not to. The next few days, I pulled back slightly. Not obviously. Just enough. Shorter conversations. Less eye contact. More focus on my phone, my drink, anything that kept things safe.
And he noticed.
Of course he did. People who carry emotional weight, they notice small changes. One afternoon, after a longer silence than usual, he looked at me and said something simple. "You okay?" That question again. The same one from the beginning. And suddenly everything felt connected. I hesitated. Because this time, it wasn't just politeness. He was actually asking. And for a moment, I considered telling the truth. That I was scared. That I didn't know what this was. That I didn't want to get attached to something I might lose. But instead, I did what most people do. I smiled.
"I feel it."
He nodded. But something in his expression told me He didn't fully believe it. And strangely, he didn't push further. He didn't ask more questions. He didn't try to fix anything. He just accepted the answer.
And stayed.
That's the thing about real connection. It doesn't force itself. It doesn't demand explanations. It gives space but doesn't disappear. And slowly, that space became something else. Not distance. Not silence. But understanding. We didn't need to say everything. We just needed to keep showing up. And in those small, repeated moments, something deeper started forming. Not loudly, not clearly, but undeniably. Because sometimes feelings don't arrive all at once. They grow quietly in the spaces between words. And by the time you notice them, it's already too late to pretend they're not there. The walls around his heart. Some people don't say, "I'm hurt." They show it in the way they hesitate, the way they pause before answering simple questions, the way they keep conversations just a little bit on the surface, even when something deeper is clearly there. That's how I started noticing the walls around Mark. Not big, obvious walls. Nothing dramatic. Just small, invisible boundaries everywhere. At first, I didn't question it. It made sense, right? He had kids, responsibilities, a life that didn't leave much room for unnecessary emotions. He wasn't the kind of person who had time to sit and talk about feelings for hours. And honestly, I wasn't either. So we stayed in that safe space. Simple conversations, light topics, comfortable distance. But here's the problem with comfort. If you stay in it too long, you start to feel the edges. You start to notice what's missing. And I started noticing it in the quietest moments, like the way he would laugh, but only for a second, or the way his eyes would soften when his kids spoke, then quickly return to that same tired look when they weren't around, or the way he never talked about his past, not even once. At first, I told myself not to think too much about it. Everyone has their own story. Everyone has things they don't want to share. But the more time we spent around each other, the more obvious it became. He wasn't just private. He was protecting something. And when someone protects something that carefully, it usually means it was broken before. One evening, the coffee shop was quieter than usual. Fewer people, softer noise, the kind of calm that makes everything feel a little more real. We were sitting across from each other again. No kids this time. Just the two of us. And for a while we talked like we always did. Simple things. Work. Weather. Nothing that required emotional risk. Until the conversation slowed. You know that moment, right? When there's nothing left to say, but neither person wants to leave. That's where things either end or begin. I looked at him. Really looked this time. At his face. At his eyes. At the way he held his cup, like he needed something to do with his hands. And before I could stop myself, I asked something I hadn't planned. Is it hard? He looked up. Not confused. Just still. What? He asked. Taking care of everything alone. There it was. The question that crossed the line. Not aggressive. Not too personal. But personal enough. For a second, I thought I had made a mistake. Because his expression changed. Not dramatically. But enough. Like something inside him had been touched, without warning. It's okay, he said quickly. You get used to it. That answer. Short. Clean. Closed. And just like that, the wall appeared again. Right where I could see it. right where I couldn't pass. I nodded. Yeah, I guess you do. And the conversation moved on. Or at least it looked like it did. But something had shifted. Because now I knew. It wasn't that he didn't have a story. It was that he had already decided not to tell it. And strangely, I understood. More than I wanted to. Because I had done the same thing. We sat there for a while longer. Talking about nothing. Avoiding everything. And then something unexpected happened.
His phone rang. Not a message this time.
A call. He looked at the screen and didn't answer right away. That hesitation. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. But it said everything. Then he picked up.
Hey, he said. His voice changed. Softer.
Careful. Yes, I know. I'll be there soon.
Pause.
No, it's okay. Just give me a few minutes. Another pause. I said I'll handle it. And then he hung up. The silence after that felt different. Not empty. Heavy. Like something real had just entered the room, even though no one else was there. You have to go? I asked. He nodded.
Yeah.
Something came up.
Of course it did.
Something always comes up when you're carrying more than one life at a time. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, then paused. Like he wanted to say something but didn't know how.
It was good seeing you, he said.
The same sentence as before. But this time it felt incomplete. Like there was something behind it that didn't come out. You too, I replied. And just like that, he left. Again. But this time it felt different. Because now I wasn't just curious. I was involved.
Not deeply.
Not officially. But enough to feel the absence when he walked away. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not about the conversation. Not about the question I asked. But about the silence that followed. Because silence, when it comes from someone who has something to say, is never empty. It's full. Full of things unsaid. Full of things held back. Full of things that might never be shared. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't just noticing his walls. I was standing right in front of them. And I didn't know if I wanted to go further. Because here's the truth. Getting close to someone with a past means stepping into something you didn't live through. It means facing emotions that don't belong to you, but will affect you anyway. It means accepting that love, if it exists, won't be simple. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Not again. But at the same time, walking away didn't feel right either. Because something had already started. Something quiet. Something slow. Something real. And the hardest part? It didn't feel like a choice anymore. Because when you start seeing someone clearly, you can't go back to not seeing them. When you start understanding their silence, you can't ignore it. And when you start caring even a little, distance stops feeling safe. It starts feeling like loss. I didn't know his full story yet. I didn't know what he had been through. I didn't know why he built those walls so carefully. But I knew this. They were there for a reason. And if I stayed, sooner or later, I would find out what that reason was. The question was, would I be ready for it when I did? Because sometimes the hardest part of connection isn't getting close. It's deciding whether you're strong enough to stay once you see what's behind the walls. When things got complicated, there's a moment in every almost relationship when things stop feeling simple. Not because something big happens, but because something small starts to matter too much. That's when you know you're no longer just two people talking. You've crossed into something else. Something undefined. Something fragile. And that's exactly where things started getting complicated with Mark. It didn't happen all at once. There was no clear moment where everything changed. Instead, it built slowly like pressure, invisible at first, until one day you feel it in everything. In the way you wait for a message, in the way you notice when someone is distracted, in the way silence suddenly feels louder than words. For me, it started with absence. A few days passed and I didn't see him at the coffee shop. At first, I didn't think much of it. People get busy. Life happens. But then another day passed. And another. And without realizing it, I started checking the door more often than usual, listening for footsteps, looking for that familiar presence in the corner. And when it wasn't there, something felt off. Not dramatic, just missing. That quiet routine we had built, those small conversations, those shared moments of silence, they had become part of my day. And without them, the day felt incomplete. That's when I realized something I didn't want to admit. I was getting attached. Not deeply. Not in a way I could clearly explain. But enough to notice when he wasn't there. Enough to feel it. And that's where things get dangerous. Because attachment creates expectations. Even the smallest ones. You start to wonder, where is he? Is he okay? Why didn't he come? And the more you think, the more your mind starts creating stories. Most of them wrong. Finally, after what felt longer than it actually was, I saw him again. Same coffee shop. Same corner. But something was different. He looked more tired than usual. Not just emotionally this time. Physically. Like he hadn't slept well. Like something had been weighing on him more than before. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. Hey, he replied. Short. Quieter than usual. I sat down across from him. And immediately, I could feel it. The distance. Not physical. Emotional. The kind that appears without explanation. We talked, but it didn't flow the same way. There were more pauses. More moments where he looked away. More times where I felt like I was speaking but not really reaching him. And that feeling? It's uncomfortable. Because you don't know what changed. You don't know if it's something you did. Or something you don't understand yet. So you try to adjust. You speak more carefully. You think more before every sentence. You try to fix something that hasn't been explained. But that only makes it worse. Because now, the conversation isn't natural anymore. It's controlled. And connection doesn't grow in control. It grows in ease. At some point, I stopped talking. Not intentionally. I just ran out of things to say that felt right. And we sat there. In silence. But not the comfortable silence we used to share. This one felt different. Heavy. Uncertain. Like something needed to be said, but neither of us wanted to be the one to say it. Finally, I broke. Are you okay? I asked. That question again. It kept coming back between us. He nodded. Yeah. Just busy. Busy. Another simple word. Another closed door. I nodded back. Okay. And just like that, the conversation ended even though we were still sitting there. Because sometimes, conversations don't end when people stop talking. They end when honesty disappears. And I could feel it. He wasn't telling me something. Not because he didn't trust me, but because he wasn't ready. And maybe I wasn't ready to hear it either. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't ignore it. He looked at it immediately. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. And then he stood up. "I have to go," he said quickly. So fast that it almost felt like an escape. "Oh, okay," I replied. He grabbed his things, then paused. For a second, it looked like he might explain, like he might say something more. But he didn't. "See you," he said. And then he left.
Just like that. No explanation. No clarity.
Just gone. I sat there for a while after that, trying to understand what just happened, replaying the conversation in my head, looking for something I missed, something I said wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about one conversation. This was about something bigger, something outside of me, something in his life that I hadn't fully seen yet. And suddenly, everything felt more complicated than before. Because now it wasn't just about connection. It was about uncertainty, about not knowing where I stood, about not knowing if I even had a place in his life beyond those small moments. That night, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. What am I doing?
Not in a dramatic way.
Just honestly. What is this? What do I want it to be? And more importantly, is this something I'm ready for? Because being close to someone with a complicated life means accepting the complications. It means understanding that you won't always come first. That there will be things you don't know, things you don't control, things you might never fully understand. And that realization, it's not easy. Especially when you've already decided to protect yourself. Part of me wanted to step back, to return to that safe place where nothing mattered too much, where no one's absence could affect me, where everything stayed simple. But another part of me didn't want to lose what we had, even if I couldn't define it, even if it was incomplete, even if it was messy. Because something about it felt real. And real things are hard to walk away from, even when they don't make sense. The next day, I didn't go to the coffee shop. Not because I didn't want to, but because I needed space. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to decide whether this was something I should continue or something I should leave behind. But here's the thing about space. Sometimes, instead of giving you clarity, it makes you realize how much something matters. Because when something is no longer in front of you, you finally see how much space it was taking inside you. And as I sat there alone again, in the quiet I thought I wanted, I realized something uncomfortable. Things weren't simple anymore. And they weren't going to be. Because this wasn't just a story about two people meeting. This was a story about timing, about past wounds, about responsibilities, about emotions that don't follow logic. And the deeper I stepped into it, the harder it would be to step out. I didn't know what was coming next. I didn't know what he was dealing with. I didn't know if this connection would grow or disappear. But I knew this. The moment things become complicated is the moment they become real. And real things always come with a cost. The question is, are you willing to pay it? The children watching quietly. You think adults are the ones deciding everything in a relationship. But sometimes the ones who understand the most are the ones who say the least. The children. After that complicated moment with Mark, the distance, the silence, the unanswered questions, I told myself I needed space. And for a few days, I stayed away from the coffee shop. It felt like the right decision. logical, safe, but also strangely empty. Because when you remove something from your life, you don't just remove the confusion. You also remove the feeling. And without that feeling, everything becomes quiet again.
Too quiet.
So eventually I went back. Not because I had clarity, not because I had answers, but because part of me wasn't ready to let go of something I didn't fully understand yet. The moment I walked in, I saw them. Not just him.
Them.
Mark was sitting at the table, and both kids were there again. But this time something felt different. They noticed me immediately. Kids always do. The little girl smiled first. That same open, honest smile that doesn't hide anything. "Hey, you came back," she said, like I had been gone for much longer than just a few days. I smiled, slightly surprised. "Yeah, I guess I did." Mark looked up. For a second, there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Relief?
Surprise?
Maybe both. "Hey," he said quietly. That was it. No explanation for the days I disappeared. No questions about where I had been. Just a simple moment of recognition. And somehow, that made it easier. I sat down with them. And almost immediately, the atmosphere felt lighter than the last time I saw him. The kids were talking, asking questions, interrupting each other, creating that kind of noise that doesn't feel chaotic. It feels alive. And in that moment, something became very clear. This wasn't just his life. This was his world. And if I stayed, I wouldn't just be getting to know him. I would be stepping into all of it. The laughter, the responsibility, the unpredictability, the emotional weight, all of it. At first, I stayed quiet, listening more than speaking, watching more than participating. Because sometimes you learn more from observation than conversation. I noticed how the kids interacted with him. Comfortable, open, but also careful. Not in an obvious way, but in small details. Like how they looked at him before asking certain questions. Like how they adjusted their tone depending on his mood. Like how they paid attention even when they were playing. And that's when it hit me. Kids who have always lived in stability don't do that. Kids who feel completely safe don't monitor the room like that. These were children who had learned, somehow, that emotions matter. That moods can shift. That silence means something. And they had adapted to it. Quietly, without anyone teaching them. That realization stayed with me. Because it told me something about the story I still didn't fully know. This wasn't just a single dad situation. This was a family that had been through something. Something that left a mark. Something that didn't disappear, even in moments that looked normal. At one point, the little boy turned to me and asked, "Why didn't you come before?" Such a simple question. But it caught me off guard. Because kids don't ask things casually. They ask what they actually feel. "I was busy," I said. He nodded, like he accepted the answer. But then he said something that stayed with me longer than I expected. "We thought you were coming back."
We.
Not just him. All of them. And suddenly, that small absence I thought didn't matter had been noticed.
Felt.
Processed. By people I didn't even realize were paying attention. I looked at Mark. He didn't say anything. But his expression changed slightly. Like that sentence had touched something he wasn't ready to explain. And that's when I understood something important. In a situation like this, Nothing is just between two people. Every action, every absence, every small change, it affects everyone. And that makes everything more complicated, but also more meaningful. Because now it's not just about feelings. It's about impact. The afternoon continued. We talked. We laughed. At some point, I found myself more relaxed than I had been in days. Not because things were simple again, but because they were real.
No pretending.
No perfect conversations. Just presence. And then another small moment happened. The kind that changes how you see everything. The little girl was drawing something on a piece of paper. She turned it toward me. "This is us," she said. I looked at the drawing. 3 small figures. And then a 4th one.
Me.
I froze for a second. Not because of the drawing itself, but because of what it meant. In her mind, I was already part of something. Not officially, not logically, but emotionally. And that's the kind of connection you can't ignore. I looked at Mark again. This time, his reaction was different. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't correct her. He just watched. Quietly. Carefully. Like he was thinking about something deeper than the moment. And in that silence, I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. This wasn't casual anymore. This wasn't just getting to know someone. This was something that had the potential to become real. And real means responsibility. Real means choices. Real means consequences. Because if I stayed, I wouldn't just be affecting him. I would be affecting them. And if I left, I wouldn't just be walking away from a man. I would be disappearing from a small world that had already started to make space for me. That thought scared me more than anything else so far. Because it meant I couldn't stay in the middle anymore. I couldn't pretend this was light. I couldn't act like nothing mattered. Something did. And I had to decide what to do with it. As the day came to an end, they started getting ready to leave. Same routine. Same small chaos. But this time it felt different. More connected. More real. Before leaving, the little girl hugged me. Without hesitation. Without asking. Just naturally. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. Because that kind of trust, you don't earn it slowly. You receive it suddenly. And once you have it, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. As they walked out, I stayed behind for a few seconds, sitting there, looking at the empty space they left, and thinking about something I hadn't fully realized until now. This story wasn't just about love. It was about entering a life that was already in progress. A life with history, with wounds, with people who were already connected in ways I couldn't fully understand yet. And the deeper I stepped into it, the more it would ask for me. Because sometimes the quietest observers are the ones who feel the most. And those children, they weren't just watching. They were feeling everything. And somehow, without even trying, I had become part of their story. The only question now was, would I stay long enough to see how it ends? The moment I wanted to leave. There's always a moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. Not the kind of moment you can point to and say, that's where everything broke. It's quieter than that. It's the moment when staying starts to feel heavier than leaving. And for me, that moment came when I realized something I wasn't ready to admit. I was no longer just observing their lives. I was emotionally inside it. And once you're inside, everything feels different. It started with something small. It always does. One evening, I came to the coffee shop a little later than usual. I didn't see them at first, so I ordered my drink and sat down, thinking maybe they wouldn't come that day. But then, the door opened. Mark walked in. Alone. That wasn't unusual. But something about him felt off. More than before. He looked distracted. Not just tired. Disconnected. Like he was physically present, but mentally somewhere else entirely. "Hey," I said when he sat down. "Hey," he replied.
Short.
Flat. And right away, I could feel it.
The distance again.
But this time stronger. We sat in silence for a moment. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where you're both aware that something isn't right, but neither of you knows how to start. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded quickly.
Yeah.
"Just a long day." That answer again. Safe.
Closed.
But this time, it didn't feel enough. Because now I cared more. And when you care more, you want more honesty. Not because you're demanding, but because you feel it's deserved. "You seem different," I said carefully. That made him pause. Not long. Just enough to show he heard it. "I'm fine," he said again. And just like that, the door closed. Not loudly, but firmly. And something inside me reacted. Not anger. Not frustration. Something deeper. Disappointment. Because I realized something in that moment. No matter how close we seemed on the surface, there was still a part of his life I wasn't allowed to see. And maybe never would be. We tried to continue the conversation. Talked about random things. But it didn't work. Every sentence felt forced. Every pause felt longer than it should. And eventually, I stopped trying. Because you can feel when a connection isn't meeting you halfway. And that feeling, it's exhausting. At some point, I looked at him and thought something I didn't expect. Maybe this isn't for me. Not because he did something wrong. Not because I didn't care. But because caring without clarity is one of the hardest things to carry. And suddenly, everything became clearer. The walls, the distance, the silence, the unpredictability. This wasn't going to be simple. And I had a choice. Stay and accept all of it. Or leave before I got in too deep. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the night. And when I got home, I didn't try to distract myself. I sat with it. Alone. In silence. And for the first time since meeting him, I asked myself the question honestly. What am I doing? Not emotionally. Logically. What is this leading to? Because feelings are one thing. Reality is another. He had kids. A past. Responsibilities I didn't fully understand. And I had uncertainty. No clear place. No clear role. Just moments. And moments, no matter how meaningful, aren't always enough. That's when the idea of leaving started to feel reasonable. Not dramatic. Not painful. Just necessary. Like stepping back before something becomes too complicated to handle. The next day, I made a decision. I wouldn't go to the coffee shop. Not just for a day. For longer. I needed distance. Not to punish him. Not to make a statement. But to protect myself. Because here's the truth no one likes to admit. Sometimes you don't leave because you don't care. You leave because you care too much without getting what you need in return. The first day was fine. The second day, a little harder. By the third day, something strange happened. I missed it. Not just him. Everything. The routine. The conversations. Even the silence. Because that silence had meaning. And without it, everything felt empty again. But I held on. Because leaving isn't supposed to feel good. If it did, it wouldn't be real. A week passed. And just when I started convincing myself that I made the right choice, something unexpected happened. I saw them. Not in the coffee shop. Outside. At a small park nearby. Mark was there. With the kids. They didn't see me at first. And for a moment, I just stood there. Watching. The kids were playing. Laughing. Running. And he was sitting on a bench. Watching them. That same tired look in his eyes, but softer. Warmer. And suddenly, something inside me broke a little. Because I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to see before. This wasn't just a man being distant. This was a man trying to hold everything together. Every day. Without dropping anything. Without showing how heavy it actually was. And in that moment, my perspective shifted. Not completely, but enough. Because I started asking a different question. Not, why is he distant? But, what is he carrying that I don't understand yet? And that question changed everything. Because it replaced frustration with curiosity. Judgment with empathy. But it didn't make the decision easier. Because now I was standing in between two truths. One part of me still wanted to leave. To protect myself. To avoid the uncertainty. The emotional risk. The possibility of getting hurt. But another part of me wasn't ready to walk away from something that felt real. Something unfinished. Something that still had questions waiting for answers. And as I stood there, watching them from a distance, I realized something that made everything even more complicated. Leaving wouldn't be simple anymore. Because I wasn't just leaving him. I was leaving them. The kids who noticed when I disappeared. The small moments that had become meaningful. The connection that had already started to grow. And suddenly, the question wasn't just about me anymore. It was about impact. About consequences. About whether walking away would actually make things easier. Or just leave a different kind of weight behind. I didn't move. I didn't go closer. I didn't call out. I just stood there, caught between two choices. Stay and risk everything. Or leave and always wonder what could have happened. And that's the hardest place to be. Not in the beginning. Not at the end. But right in the middle. Where nothing is clear. But everything matters.
Choosing to stay.
People think choosing to stay is a romantic moment. Like something you do with certainty. With confidence. With a clear heart and no doubts. But the truth? Choosing to stay is often the exact opposite. It's messy. Uncomfortable. Full of questions you can't fully answer. And sometimes it feels riskier than leaving. After that moment at the park, I didn't go home right away. I walked. No destination. No plan. Just trying to understand what I was feeling. Because something had shifted. Not dramatically. But enough to make me pause. Before, leaving felt like control. Like I was protecting myself from something uncertain. But now, staying felt like honesty. Not because it was easier, but because it was real. And real doesn't always come with guarantees. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was overthinking, but because I was finally thinking clearly. There's a difference. Overthinking is fear repeating itself. Clarity is quiet but firm. And what became clear to me was this. I wasn't confused about him. I was afraid of what being with him would require from me. Because this wasn't a simple story. He wasn't just a man I liked. He was a father. A man with history. With responsibilities that didn't pause just because someone new entered his life. And if I stayed, I wouldn't just be choosing him. I would be choosing everything that came with him. The kids.
The past.
The emotional complexity. The unpredictable moments. The silence. The weight. And that's not something you choose lightly. The next morning I made a decision. Not a dramatic one. Not a this will change everything kind of decision.
Just a simple one.
I would go back. Not to fix anything. Not to define anything. Just to be present again. When I walked into the coffee shop, my heart was beating faster than I expected. Not because I was nervous about seeing him, but because I didn't know what version of us I would walk into. Would it be distant again? Awkward? Or something else? He was already there, sitting at the same table, alone. This time, he saw me immediately, and for a second, neither of us moved. It felt like one of those moments where everything slows down just enough for you to realize, this matters.
He walked over.
Hey. Hey. Same words, but different tone. There was something more open this time. Not fully, but enough to feel it. I sat down. No small talk.
No pretending.
Just a quiet moment where both of us seemed to understand that something needed to be said. I didn't come for a few days. I started. He nodded. I noticed.
Of course he did.
That small sentence carried more meaning than it seemed. It meant I wasn't invisible. It meant my presence mattered. I needed space, I said honestly. Not as an excuse. Not as a defense. Just as the truth. He didn't interrupt. Didn't question it. Just listened. And then, after a short pause, he said something I didn't expect. I didn't know what to say to you. That caught me off guard. Because for the first time, he wasn't hiding behind "I'm fine." He was admitting uncertainty. And that changed the entire dynamic.
Why?
I asked softly. He looked down at his hands for a moment, not avoiding the question, just choosing how to answer. Because things aren't simple, he said. I know, I replied. But this time, those words weren't just something I said. They were something I understood. He took a breath. And then, slowly, he opened up. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But enough. Enough to let me see a part of what he had been holding back. He talked about the pressure. The responsibility. The constant feeling of needing to be strong for his kids, even when he didn't feel strong at all. He talked about his past relationship. Not in detail, but enough to understand that it left more than just memories. It left caution.
Fear.
A kind of emotional hesitation that doesn't disappear easily. And as he spoke, I realized something important. His distance wasn't rejection. It was protection. Not just for himself, but for everything around him. Because when you have people depending on you, you don't get to take emotional risks lightly. And suddenly, everything made more sense. Not perfectly, but enough to shift how I felt. I don't expect things to be easy, I said after a moment. He looked at me. Really looked this time. Then why are you here? He asked. A simple question, but a real one. And I could have given a safe answer. Something light. Something that didn't reveal too much. But instead,
I chose honesty.
because I'm not done understanding this yet. Not understanding you. Not understanding us. Just this. Whatever this was. And for a moment, neither of us spoke. Because sometimes honesty creates silence. Not awkward silence. Just space. Space for something real to settle in. He nodded slowly. Not in agreement. Not in certainty. But in acknowledgement. Like he understood what I meant, even if he didn't fully know what it would lead to. And in that moment, something shifted again. Not into a perfect relationship. Not into a clear direction. But into something more grounded. More honest. More real. The kind of connection that doesn't rely on everything being easy, but instead survives because both people are willing to stay, even when it's not. Later that day, the kids came in. Same energy. Same presence. But this time, I felt different sitting there. Not like an outsider observing, but like someone who had made a quiet decision.
To stay.
Not forever. Not with guarantees.
But for now.
And sometimes that's the only kind of decision you can make. A temporary yes. In a situation that doesn't offer permanent answers. As we all sat there, talking, laughing, sharing small moments, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. Choosing to stay doesn't mean you're sure. It means you're willing. Willing to face uncertainty. Willing to accept imperfection. Willing to grow into something, instead of expecting it to already be complete. And that kind of choice, it's not easy, but it's real. And real is what makes it worth it. Because sometimes, the strongest decisions aren't the ones that feel safe. They're the ones that feel true. And in that moment, staying felt true, even if I didn't know where it would lead. Healing a broken home. People love to believe that healing is something that happens all at once. A moment, a breakthrough, a conversation that suddenly fixes everything. But real healing? It's quieter than that. Slower. Almost invisible until one day, you realize something doesn't hurt the way it used to. And that's how it started with us. Not with a big decision. Not with a clear label. But with small, ordinary moments that slowly began to feel different. After that conversation where Mark finally opened up, even just a little, something shifted between us. The distance didn't disappear. But it softened. Like a wall that was still there, just not as cold. We didn't suddenly become closer overnight. There were still pauses. Still moments of uncertainty. Still days where he felt far away again. But now, I understood something I didn't before. Not every silence means rejection. Sometimes it just means someone is trying in the only way they know how. And once you understand that, you stop taking everything personally. That's when the real change began. Not in him. In me. I stopped expecting every moment to feel clear. I stopped looking for signs that things were working. And instead, I started paying attention to what was actually happening. The small things. The quiet progress. The details most people would miss. Like the way he started asking me questions. Not big ones. Just simple things. How was your day? Did that thing you mentioned go well? It might sound small, but for someone who used to keep everything inside, that was effort. And effort is a form of care. The kids changed too. Not in obvious ways, but in how they interacted with me. The little boy started sitting closer. Not right next to me, but closer than before. Like he was slowly testing the distance. The little girl, she didn't need time. She was already there. Open.
Warm.
But now, she started including me in things without asking. Look what we made. Do you want to see this? It wasn't a question. It was an assumption. Like my presence was already part of their world. And that realization? It was both beautiful and terrifying. Because the deeper I became part of their lives, the more it mattered. And when something matters more, the risk feels bigger. One afternoon, something happened that made me understand just how deep this was going. We were all at the coffee shop again. Nothing special. Just another day. Or at least, that's what I thought. The kids were playing quietly. Mark was more relaxed than usual. And for a moment, everything felt normal. Comfortable. Safe. Then the little boy asked a question. Out of nowhere. Are you going to stay? The room didn't go silent, but something inside me did. Because that wasn't a casual question. That was a question built from observation. From feeling. From everything he hadn't said before. I looked at him. He wasn't smiling. Wasn't joking. He was serious. Waiting. And in that moment, I realized something important. Kids don't ask about the future unless they've already felt the past. They don't worry about people leaving unless they've experienced it before. And suddenly, this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about what my presence meant to them. What my absence would mean. I didn't answer right away. Because I didn't want to lie. But I also didn't want to give a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I'm here now, I said gently. It wasn't a perfect answer, but it was honest. And sometimes honesty is the only thing you can offer. He nodded, not fully satisfied, but not upset either, just accepting it for what it was. I glanced at Mark. He had heard everything. Of course he had. But he didn't interrupt, didn't correct, didn't try to control the moment. He just watched. And in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not fear, not distance. Something softer. Gratitude. Maybe even hope. And that's when it became clear to me. Healing wasn't something I was doing alone. It was something happening between all of us. In the way we showed up. In the way we stayed. Even when things weren't certain. In the way we allowed each other to exist without demanding perfection. Days turned into weeks. And those small moments started to connect. Like pieces of something bigger. We developed a rhythm. Not a routine. Something more flexible than that. But still consistent. And consistency is something broken families don't trust easily. It has to be proven. Over time. Through actions. Not words. There were still hard moments. Of course there were. Days when Mark pulled back again. Days when the kids were quieter. More sensitive. Moments where I questioned everything. Wondered if I was doing the right thing. If I was stepping into something too complicated. Too uncertain. But every time I felt that doubt, something small would happen. A look. A word. A moment of connection. And it would remind me, this isn't perfect. But it's real. And real is worth something. One evening, as we were getting ready to leave, the little girl did something simple. But it stayed with me longer than anything else. She grabbed my hand. Not tightly. Not dramatically. Just naturally. like it was the most normal thing in the world. And in that moment, I realized something that changed how I saw everything. Healing doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes it just feels like comfort, like ease, like something that used to be complicated becoming simple, without you even noticing when it happened. I looked at Mark. He saw it too. That small gesture, that quiet connection. And this time he didn't look away. He didn't close off. He just let it be. And that was his version of healing. Not fixing everything. Not becoming someone new overnight. Just allowing something good to exist without pushing it away. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not erasing the past. Not pretending nothing happened. But learning how to move forward without letting the past control every moment. As we walked out together that evening, something felt different. Not complete. Not finished. But stable. Like we weren't just reacting to emotions anymore. We were building something. Slowly. Carefully. But genuinely. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing outside their world. I felt like I was inside it. Not fully. Not permanently. But enough to matter. Enough to feel it. Enough to understand that this story was no longer just his. Or mine. It was ours. And healing? It wasn't a destination we were trying to reach. It was something happening. One quiet moment at a time. The only question now was, would that be enough to hold us together when the next challenge came? Because something told me this wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. A love worth fighting for. People think the end of a story is where everything finally makes sense, where all the questions are answered, where love becomes clear, stable, and easy. But real life doesn't work like that. There's no perfect ending. No moment where everything suddenly becomes certain forever. Instead, there's a choice. A quiet, ongoing choice.
To stay. To try.
To keep showing up, even when things are still uncertain. And that's where our story truly arrived. Not at a finish line, but at a moment of truth. Weeks had passed since things started to feel more stable between us. Not perfect. Never perfect. But steady enough to feel real. We had built something. Something fragile, but strong in its own way. The kids were more open. More comfortable. Mark was still careful, still reserved at times, but no longer distant in the way he used to be. There was effort. There was presence. There was something growing even if we didn't define it. And then life tested it, because it always does. It started with a small disagreement. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just a difference. Something simple that, in another situation, wouldn't have mattered much. But in a situation like ours, everything carries weight. We were at the coffee shop again. The kids were nearby, busy with their own world. And Mark and I were talking about something practical. Plans.
Time.
Priorities. The kind of conversation that doesn't sound emotional but actually is. I suggested something. A small change. Something that made sense to me. But the moment I said it, I saw his expression shift. Not anger. Not frustration. Something more defensive. That's not really how things work for me, he said. His tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm.
Closed.
And suddenly, I felt it again. That wall. Not as strong as before, but still there. I didn't mean it like that, I said. I know, he replied. but his body language didn't match his words. And in that moment, something familiar came back. That feeling of being outside. Like no matter how close we got, there was still a part of his life I couldn't step into. And this time, I didn't ignore it. Then help me understand, I said. Not softly, not carefully, but honestly, because I wasn't the same person I was at the beginning. I wasn't just observing anymore. I was involved. And involvement requires clarity. He stayed quiet for a moment, and I could see it. That internal conflict. The part of him that wanted to open up, and the part that still held back. This isn't just about me, he said finally. It's about them. I glanced at the kids. Of course it was. It always was. I know, I said. But I'm not asking to change everything. I'm just trying to understand where I fit. That word, fit, it stayed in the air between us. Because that was the real question all along. Not what are we, but where do I belong in your life? And sometimes that question is harder to answer. Because it forces you to define something that has been growing naturally. Without labels. Without pressure. Until now. He looked at me. Really looked. And for the first time, he didn't avoid it. I don't fully know yet, he admitted. Honest. Raw. Not perfect. But real. And strangely, that answer didn't push me away. It grounded me. Because uncertainty, when it's shared honestly, feels different than distance. It feels like something you can work through. Together. I'm not asking for a perfect answer, I said. I'm asking if this is something you're willing to figure out with me. That was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But real. The kind of moment where everything could shift in either direction. He didn't respond right away. And I didn't rush him. Because some answers need space. And then slowly he nodded. Yeah, he said. Simple. But firm. Yeah, I am. And that was it. No big declaration. No promises about the future. Just a choice. To keep going. To keep trying. To not walk away just because things weren't clear yet. And somehow that meant more than any perfect answer ever could. The rest of the day felt different. Not because the problem disappeared. But because we had faced it. Together. And facing something together changes how it feels. The kids joined us again later. Same energy. Same laughter. But now I saw them differently. Not as something complicated. Not as something uncertain. But as part of something worth understanding. Worth being patient for. As we got ready to leave, the little boy looked at me again. Not with worry this time. Just curiosity. You're coming back, right? He asked. This time, I didn't hesitate. Yeah, I said. And I meant it. Not as a promise of forever, but as a promise of intention, of effort, of staying as long as it made sense to keep building something real. He smiled. And that small moment, it felt bigger than anything else that day, because it showed something had changed. Not just in me, not just in Mark, but in all of us. We were no longer just reacting to the past. We were starting to create something new. Something that didn't ignore the past, but also didn't let it control everything. As we walked out together, I felt something I hadn't felt at the beginning. Not excitement. Not uncertainty. Something quieter. Stronger. Peace. Not because everything was solved, but because I knew something important Love isn't about finding something perfect. It's about choosing something real and being willing to fight for it. Not in dramatic ways, not in painful sacrifices, but in small, everyday decisions.
To stay.
To understand.
To grow.
And maybe that's the truth no one tells you when you feel like giving up. The moment you think it's easier to walk away might be the moment something real is just beginning. So, if you're standing in that place right now,
confused,
tired, unsure if it's worth it, ask yourself one question. Is it real? Because if it is, then maybe, just maybe, it's worth staying a little longer to find out how the story ends. And maybe this wasn't just a story about falling for a single dad in Ohio. Maybe it was about something deeper. About the moment you almost give up but don't. About choosing to stay when leaving feels easier. Because the truth is, not every love story begins perfectly. Some begin in confusion, in silence, in broken pieces that don't seem to fit. But sometimes those are the stories that matter the most. So, if you've ever felt tired of trying, if you've ever questioned whether love is still worth it, if you've ever stood at that quiet edge between staying and walking away, this story isn't over. And maybe neither is yours. What would you do in this situation? Stay or walk away? Tell me in the comments. If this story made you feel something, don't forget to like and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. And if you want more real English stories, emotional journeys, and life lessons that actually stay with you, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications because the next story might be the one that changes everything for you. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we tell the ones you never forget.